Hello everyone. Today we are making tomatillo salsa. Now this is your typical salsa verde that you buy in the store or have in restaurants. Basically salsa verde is green salsa. Tomatillos are obviously green. The recipe that I'm using is the tomatillo salsa recipe in the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. Okay, so I'm going to be following that exactly as it's written. But before I get into it, I want to talk to you a little bit about tomatillos in case you haven't ever used tomatillos. First of all, you can see they're green. They have this outer husk on them. And so the first thing that you do is you take off the outer husk and you'll wash all of them. They'll have a little sticky residue on them. That's completely normal. So once you wash them, you're going to cut out the core, the hard part, kind of like you have on a tomato. You can cut out that part, and then you're going to chop them up. Now the recipe says chopped cored husked tomatillos. Now I actually ended up using a food processor for mine, so they're a little bit pulverized than what the recipe calls for, and I just realized I didn't wash that, so I'll go ahead and wash it before I throw it into the rest of them. But before I do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of things you might encounter. You can see that there's kind of a bad spot here, and you want to just cut off any bad spots on the tomatillo, okay, and discard them. You don't want to use any bad spots. Another thing that you might come across is dirt. You open up the tomatillo, like you take this off and you see, I mean, that looks pretty nasty. It might look like something that's really wrong with it, but you can see that it comes right off. So you would just wash that off. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish processing these few tomatillos that I have out just to show you guys some things, and then I'll bring you back and show you the rest of the recipe. By the way, I'm going to pop up on the screen a picture of a bowl of the tomatillos that have all been husked, so you can see that. And then also I have a picture that I'm going to put up of them cut into fourths. So that's what I started off with before putting them in the blender. And these ones that I'm doing, I washed and I'm just finely chopping them, and I'm going to put them in with the rest of my tomatillos. And I'll show you that in a second, but you'll see that most of the tomatillos that I'm using, since I threw into a little food processor, they're more pulverized with a few chunks. I figure these that I'm cutting by hand will just add a little bit of texture. If you don't have a food processor, it doesn't actually call for one, so that's no problem for you to, just cut them up like I'm cutting them up. That's probably really what's intended. But typically when I make tomatillo salsa, it's not real chunky, and so that's why I wanted to go through the process of using the blender to blend most of them and then adding a few chunks just for texture. So that's really a matter of preference. You can, or also what you have. If you don't have a food processor, this recipe does not call for one. This calls for chopped tomatillos, and that's what I'm doing here. So no worries at all if you don't have a food processor. One thing to keep in mind too is that this salsa is actually going to cook for about 10 minutes. So even these chunks will kind of soften, and then of course it'll be canned, and so they'll reduce down as well. So I just put, you can see the ones that I just put in, and the rest of it's kind of saucy. So mine's going to be a mixture of real saucy with a few little chunks. A small amount of chunks, and I think that's going to actually add some nice texture to it. Okay, so now let's get into the recipe. The recipe calls for 5½ cups chopped, cored, husked tomatillos. That's what I have here. I have 5½ cups of tomatillos that I've processed. Now notice that this is 5½ cups after they've been cut up and everything. I didn't measure them before I started cutting them, but I can tell you it was more than 5½ cups. It was probably more like 8 cups or maybe even a little bit more. So when you're buying your tomatillos, just think in terms of you need more tomatillos than what seems like 5½ cups of whole tomatillos. Okay, I'm going to put that aside. And the next thing that it calls for is 1 cup of chopped onion. And I've already chopped up the onion. So that was 1 onion. It was slightly, very slightly more than a cup. But a medium onion, medium to large onion should be enough. And then it calls for 1 cup of chopped seeded green chili peppers. Okay, now it does differentiate between the types of, it doesn't say you have to use jalapeno. You can use whatever. I'm using jalapeno, but it says both jalapeno and long green chili peppers work well in this recipe. If you are not a heat seeker, try milder poblano or Anaheim peppers. Okay, so I am using jalapeno. It said seeded, and I left the seeds in 1. You can see I have, this is a 1 cup measure, and I left 1 whole because I want to show you how I do jalapenos, but I'm going to go ahead and dump that into the pot, and then I'll add what I'm working on now to this. So what I do with jalapenos is I just cut off the side, the top, the stem top, and then I cut them in half. The thing that you have to be careful of with working with jalapenos is that if you mess with, your hands touch these, the seeds and the membranes, and then you like scratch your nose or rub your eyes or anything, you're going to be sorry. It's really, it really burns. It leaves a residue on your hands that will burn. So you can use gloves, or if you don't have gloves, I'm just using a little sandwich bag, and I'm just digging onto the jalapeno like that, and then I'm actually going to pull it. And one reason I love using the bags is I'm pulling it into the bag, and then I'm actually going to do both of them. Let me do both of them and I'll show you. I'm pulling all the seeds into the bag and the membrane, and if you get a couple seeds left out, that's fine, into the bag, and then I'm turning the bag basically inside out, and I don't have to touch the seeds at all. I'll just go ahead and toss those. So then I'm going to go ahead and dice these up and add them to the pot along with the other jalapenos that I've already put in the pot. Now it doesn't say how coarsely to chop them, but I like chopping them fairly fine because you don't want to wind up with some really spicy chunks. I mean, unless you like spice, but you don't want someone to have a surprise. And so I think if you chop them bigger, somebody might end up being surprised. Now when you remove the seeds, it does remove most of the heat. There is still some heat, but you mainly get flavor, and so you don't have to worry about this too much. But like the recipe said, if you prefer a milder salsa, you can use poblano or Anaheim peppers instead of jalapenos. But we kind of like heat, so we are going to use the jalapenos now. Okay, you can see that I've added the jalapenos to the pot. So we've got so far the tomatillos, 5½ cups of chopped tomatillos, a cup of chopped onion, and a cup of diced jalapenos, seed removed if you don't like the heat, or you can leave some of the seeds in or use a different type of pepper. Okay, now the next thing is we're going to add in ½ cup of white vinegar, 4 tablespoons of lime juice, I love lime juice in salsas or any type of Asian or Hispanic food, so I'm really happy this recipe calls for lime juice. 4 cloves of chopped garlic, and I'm using minced garlic that I got from a jar, and I put just 4 little spoonfuls, kind of guesstimating how much would be equal to cloves of garlic, because obviously some cloves are bigger than others. Starting to smell good already. All right, then it calls for 2 tablespoons finely chopped cilantro. Now we love cilantro. So I'm putting basically a whole bunch of cilantro in, just using the top part, and I didn't chop it real finely. But you don't want to stray too far from a canning, especially a water bath canning recipe, which this is, because of the acid level, but I think a little bit of extra cilantro is not going to hurt. Then you need 2 teaspoons of ground cumin. There's 1 teaspoon. And there's the other teaspoon. A half a teaspoon of salt. And a half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes. I'm a little tempted to leave out the red pepper flakes since I left in some jalapeno, but again, my family kind of likes the spice, so I think that it'll be fine to go ahead and add in the red pepper flakes. Okay, I'm gonna give that a good stir. This looks like it's gonna be nice. Okay, now reading the instructions, it says prepare the canner, jars, and lids. So I don't know if you can see it, but actually I'm just going to leave this down here. I have my jars in my Instant Pot just to get them hot. I just use the saute setting and put water in with my jars, and I'm also using 3 regular ball cur lids, and I have 2 of my Harvest Guard lids to use. And the reason is because I'm planning to give some of this salsa away to my daughter and also to my son, and so I don't want to give them the Harvest Guard lids. So I've got some Harvest Guard lids for the ones I'm keeping for myself, and then I have just the regular lids, which I'm not heating, I just have them here. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Those things are in a pot of hot water and staying warm. And then it says, in a large stainless steel saucepan, combine all of the things that I've just combined, that I just showed you. Bring to a boil over medium-high heat, stirring constantly. Reduce heat and boil gently, stirring frequently for 10 minutes. So I've got these on my induction burner just because that's easier for me to do. Here I'm going to bring them to a boil, and I'll bring you back at that time. Okay, as you can see, I brought it to a boil. Now I'm going to reduce the heat and simmer it for 10 minutes. So I'm setting a timer for 10 minutes, and I'm going to simmer it, and then I'll bring you back. I forgot to mention that during this process, you should stir frequently. Okay, so you don't have to stir it constantly, but during the 10 minutes that it's simmering, stir it frequently. The salsa has been simmering for 10 minutes. So now I'm going to ladle it into the jars, and move you over where you can see. These are hot jars, and obviously the salsa is very hot. So I'm just going to use the ladle to put in approximately up to the rim. I'll go back and I'll add more in if need be. I'll debubble and all of that. So the jars are definitely hot, so they're a little hard to handle. Okay, let me go get the other jars out of the hot water. I've left them in there to keep them hot as long as possible. Actually, let me go ahead and debubble these and see if I need to add any onto them. Okay, they actually are good. I have a paper towel with some vinegar. I'm wiping the rims. This is just to make sure that you get a good seal, that there's not any debris. And now that I look at this, I want to put just a teeny bit more in there. And I'm going to debubble. Wipe the rims. Put the rings on. Fingertip tight. Fingertip tight. I've already put a little bit of vinegar in the canner, and I do that. I can dump this this little dish of vinegar into the water, but for some reason I tend to forget it. So I went ahead and put some vinegar into my canner. Now, putting vinegar into the canner is not absolutely essential, but it helps if you have hot water. Let me see if I can get this out right. If you have hard water, which I do, then you can end up with the jars just end up not looking very nice. They get kind of this yucky film on them. And you know what? I think I'm going to have more salsa than jars. And that's okay, because if that's the case, I'll just go ahead and run another canner load of them. So I'm debubbling. All right. And I'm going to use one more of my regular ball lids, and then the other two I'm going to use my Harvest Guard lids, and those will be for my family. Guard lids are a little bit different than your ball curd lids. They're two pieces. You've got the lid and you've got a gasket. I have had these in hot water along with the jars because that's essential for these. You no longer have to heat the ball / curd lids, but you do need to heat these Harvest Guard lids. And so you put the lid on, you center it, put the rim on, and then notice I'm putting my finger here. I'm just doing it until the jar starts to spin, okay? And that is tight enough. Okay, now all of the jars are in the canner. You can't see all of them from this angle, but you can see that they're in the canner. Now I'm going to add hot water to the canner. Again, hot product, hot jars, hot water in the canner. If you were filling your jars with cold, you would use cold jars and cold water or room temperature water. But I am using all hot in this recipe. Now, with water bath canning, you have to come above the jars by at least an inch or two. And you can see they are not completely covered. So I'm going to use the water that I used, that I heated the jars in. So I'm gonna just use that to cover the lids all the way. So I've got about 1.5 inches above the lids. Okay, I just plugged in my canner. You can see that it's lit up. And I'm going to turn the lid down and switch it to the exhaust position. You always start off, even if you're pressure canning, you start in the exhaust position. Since I'm water bath canning, it will be in the exhaust position the whole time. And then I'm going to move the lid to the closed position. So over on the side it says closed, and I just moved it to the closed position. Okay, now I'm going to select water bath steam, and according to the ball book, this recipe should be processed for 15 minutes, but because of my altitude, I'm adding 5 minutes on. So I'm going to do 20 minutes. And pressing start. Now you'll have to look up your own altitude. The 15 minutes is for up to 1,000 elevation. I'm at between 1,500 and 1,600 elevation, and therefore I add 5 minutes. Higher elevation, sometimes have to add more. So that's something that you'll need to look up for yourself. I was just thinking though that if you guys think it would be helpful for me to make a quick video just explaining how to adjust for altitude, I would be happy to do that. So what's happening now is it is going around and around, waiting for the heat in the canner, the water in the canner, to heat up. So we're looking for a steady stream of steam. Once that happens, I will press the start button and it will start to do the 20-minute countdown. I'll bring you back at that time. Okay, there is now a steady stream of steam. I don't know if you can see it, but you can probably hear it. So once that happens, I'm going back down and I'm pressing start. And now you'll notice that it's 20 minutes The countdown will begin at this point, and then once it counts all the way down, there might be a little pressure built up. If there is, I'll let it release and then open the canner. I'll keep the lid open for about 5 minutes before removing the jars, and I'll bring you back at that time. Okay, it's been counting down. You can hear that it's still, the exhaust is still going out, the steam is still shooting out, and the 20 minutes is about done. So I want to turn my camera back on so that I could capture the very end of the process. Okay, you can hear it beeping, it's showing off. I'm going to unplug the canner at this time. Now you can hear that it is still steaming away. Because it's steaming away and all of that, there's a little a little button that pops up. If you use an Instant Pot or anything like that, you have the same thing that happens. And that button pops up, and because of it, you can't open the lid. So I'm just going to show you right now. If I try opening the lid, it's not going to open, and that's because there's some pressure built up in there right now. So I'm just going to turn off the camera, and it usually takes just a couple minutes before I'm able to open the lid, and I'll bring you back at that time. Yeah, I can hear there's still, and see that there's still some steam coming out, but I was able to I just used this little debubbler thing, and I went ahead and pushed the valve down. Now, when you're using the pressure canner, when you're doing a pressure canner recipe, you would never do anything to speed things up like that. But now that that button is down, I can turn the lid and open it. And I'm going to let it sit for about 5 minutes before I take the jars out, just to let them come down off of temperature a little bit gradually. I ended up filling 4 more jars. I had enough salsa to fill 4 more half pints. So I ended up with a total of 9 half-pint jars of this recipe. Since these are sitting at room temperature, they've come down off of temperature, I'm going to wait till the temperature in the canner goes down, the water temperature goes down to, you know, lukewarm-ish. And then I'm going to go ahead and process this second group of jars. So I'm going to just pause this video for about 5 minutes, and then I'll bring you back and take the jars out, and I'll show you the one step you need to do with the Harvest Guard lids if you happen to use that type of lid. Be back in just a few minutes. Okay, so this is actually the second batch of salsa that I ran. I had 4 more jars that didn't fit in the first time, so I processed them now, and I just opened the lid to the canner 5 minutes ago, and I'm going to take them out. And first, I want to say, oh, this is dripping like crazy. This one I'm going to put over in the front just so I don't forget which one it is, because, go ahead and move this down here. This one was a little bit tipped over, so it may not seal. We'll see. Okay, now you'll notice that 3 of the ones that I took out are Harvest Guard lids. I'm going to wait just a few minutes, and then I will tighten the rings on those. So I have another video where I show you that, and I'll leave a link for it. I show you the whole process of how to use the Harvest Guard lids. So, but anyway, after just a few minutes, I will just, everything's of course extremely hot, so I'll just be holding on to the jar with the pot holder and tightening the lids. So I'm going to now cover these. As soon as I finish tightening those, I'll cover the lids, or excuse me, the jars like this. That is something that Harvest Guard recommends, so that's what I do. And then in the morning I'll bring you back so you can see which ones have sealed. Hopefully all of them have sealed. By the way, before I finish this off, while I'm thinking about it, I just wanted to say that in the ball book where I got this recipe, it said salsa flavors mellow and blend during shelf storage. Optimum flavor is achieved after 3 to 4 weeks. So I'm not going to open any of these until about a month from now. Thankfully, I'm making them for, well, for myself, but also some for my family for Christmas. and so they should be good at the time that I'm sending them. But that's just something to be aware of. You can eat them right away, but they're going to taste better if you wait a few weeks. All right, I'll see you in the morning. Well, it is now the next morning, and I wanted to show you what I ended up with. I have 7 of these wide mouth half pints and 1 regular mouth half pint. So I ended up with 8 half pints. This represents one that did not seal. It hadn't siphoned or anything like that, but just when I checked it, it hadn't sealed. So I put a regular lid on it, and I put that one in the fridge. So overall, I'm pleased, very pleased. I'm not happy that one, didn't seal. I always prefer, obviously, that everyone seals. But really, this was not bad at all, and I'll enjoy eating the one that didn't seal. So some of these I will be giving as gifts. So I'm excited to give this a try. I hope that you'll try it as well. And if you liked this video, I would definitely appreciate that you like the video and that you subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.